Do you think that we should legalize drugs in society?
Decriminalization is definitely one thing.
Yeah.
Legalization is another thing. Again, I think that would potentially just be the government trying to get their slice of the pie, because then they can look at how much tax they take off booze. Like, I know a lot of people in the hospitality industry, and that increase goes up every 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's just the government being greedy. And taking from an industry, that gets into the lockdowns, which I won't touch on. But I feel like if the government did legalize things, they'd just want to take their slice.
Yeah. So is that the reason why you would think that we shouldn't legalize?
Well, I don't know, man. It puts it into people always want to do something that's illegal.
Right.
So I think that's sort of human nature.
Yeah.
So if you legalize one thing, is it going to push it in another way? Like, I guess you could do case studies on what's gone on in the US where they've legalized weed. Has that changed drug culture?
Yeah.
From what I'm seeing on social media, it looks like they're still pretty fucked over there.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, they'll just figure out another way to get hot fentanyl and all that sort of stuff.
But it's interesting. I always like asking people because, it's been a journey for me. I think we most definitely should, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it doesn't mean that it has to look like alcohol. Like you can go down to the IGA and get a fucking bag of smack or something. No. But I think, I definitely think that we should. Like, I think it would eliminate organized crime and a big chunk of their sort of business in a heartbeat, right? Yeah. And also, I think, people might be using drugs, but again, like, to me, that's almost like not the most important thing, because heaps of people are using alcohol and fucking other people up as well, but it will stop like all the people going to prison and all the other shit that happens. Boom. What is happening, beautiful people? My name is Jack Nagel, and this is another episode of the Real Drug Talk podcast. But today, this isn't the Real Drug Talk podcast in actual fact. It's actually an episode of a podcast called 3000 Podcast that I was a guest on a couple of months back now. So for those of you watching, I'm doing a bit of a screen share, and this is my man Maloney. Now I wanted to do a bit of a screen share and introduce you to the 3000 podcast that I was on, that he runs, because after meeting him and doing my interview, which I thoroughly enjoyed, I've become a real fan of his podcast, and I want to pump him up a bit for a couple of reasons, because I genuinely actually am really enjoying his show and listening to some of the guests that he has on. He has some heads on there, and really, it's all about Melbourne and street culture and people that have been influential and done different stuff in Melbourne. So it's quite an interesting podcast, and I quite like it because there's a few like dudes on there that, I'd heard of from back in the day and whatever. So that's been really cool. But the second reason is I actually stood him up on Instagram the other night. I was meant to jump on his live, and I totally got sidetracked and missed it. So I want everybody to go and at least have a listen to the show. And if you like what he's putting down and putting out, go and give it a follow. So I think the best place to find it is actually on YouTube. So I thought I'd just show you here for those on a screen share. Obviously, just bang in 3000 podcast. I'm not patronizing anyone, but you would be shocked at how many people find it challenging to find their way around. Because at one point, I don't think he had all his episodes up on Spotify, but they're probably up on there now. And I said Wiz because I'm looking at the episode, but on Apple Podcasts as well. But YouTube's the best place. He's got all the videos there. And he's got some really interesting guys, skaters, graffiti guys that have done interesting stuff in the food space. Heaps of different characters. So go and check it out. The 3000 podcast with Maloney. I really enjoyed it. And just doing a crossover episode and dropping it on our show. As always, guys, this episode is brought to you by Connection-Based Living, which is our outpatient support program. Our enrollments, so if you need help for addiction, that's what we help with, but we help people to get recovery and beat their addiction without having to go to rehab. So if that sounds of interest to you, get in quickly, because we're closing our enrollments It looks like I said at the end of September, but it looks like October now, just because spots are filling up quick, but we still got like 4. I'm not sure if they're going to fill up before the end of the month. But yeah, we've only got like 4 or 5 spots left that we can fill. So if you've ever wanted to work with us or heard it before or need some help now, jump in quick before those spots go. Links will be for that in the description. But enjoy the podcast. We talk about drug and alcohol policy, my addiction story. Maloney even kind of shares some stuff around his drinking, his thoughts. Yeah, it's a really good show. So hope you guys enjoy. Good to be back with the show, and we'll be vibing in your ears again soon. Peace.
3,000.
My name's Maloney. This is the 3000 podcast. I don't have a cool intro like you do, man, but I'm happy to be joined by Jack Nagel. He is the man behind the Real Drug podcast.
Real Drug Talk, yeah.
Real Drug Talk podcast,
yeah.
Sorry. And you do have a cool intro, man, which I'm yet to sort of figure out, so I'm envious of that.
Well, I'm glad you think it's cool, because sometimes I think, fucking hell, I'm just rambling, you know?
You've got a hook, which is cool. I appreciate you taking the time today, man. We'll talk about addiction, we'll talk about your podcast, we'll talk about your personal addiction, if you're cool to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
And all that sort of stuff. So, cheers for coming. And let's sort of start with your own sort of stuff. Growing up, whereabouts did you grow up, and how did you find your issues with substances?
So I grew up in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, so Clayton, kind of like that Dandenong line.
Suburbia.
You know? Yeah, like Murrumbeena, then Clayton, then we moved to Bentley, which is kind of where, I started getting into trouble. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was just like a pretty privileged, happy-go-lucky fucking Aussie kid, played cricket in the summer and footy in the winter and just loved sport and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like was a pretty good kid and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just unfortunately got tangled up in the wrong kind of mess as well.
I think it happens to people of all sorts of different backgrounds, and drugs or addiction doesn't discriminate to anyone.
That's right. Yeah, 100%. That's something that I've learned. That's actually something that helped me change my life as well, is that I remember when I eventually did go to rehab, there was this guy that was like full, junged out, one of the sickest people I'd ever seen. And he was a lot older than me. I was young when I went, and he had a similar kind of story to me at that age. He was trying out to play for North Melbourne, all that kind of stuff, but just, got hooked on smack, and he was completely fucked. And I think he died not long after. And just stuff like that. I met this guy, Gavin Krusiska, in my early days, who was a Collingwood footy player, people like that. And that actually helped me get better. So yeah, it is interesting. It definitely doesn't discriminate.
Yeah, totally. Oh, now I've lost all my notes. What are we doing here? Here we go. So people do say it a lot. It's a term that's used in that sort of scene, but gateway drugs and that sort of thing. But obviously it's a real thing. Yeah. So you start off smoking weed or something like that?
Pretty much. Yeah. So for me, so what happened, to give you the very kind of quick elevator version. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I played sport like crazy, loved footy, broke my jaw when I was 13, was always really tall. So I'm 6'6". Just started playing basketball, was good at it, and played rep and all that stuff. And when I was a junior, I kind of get a bit embarrassed saying it, because I don't want to be one of those fuckwits, you know what I mean? Could have done
this. Yeah.
But let's just say I was kind of in the mix, potential for something good to happen, potentially with a sporting career at some...
You've got the physique.
Some level, yeah. And I was playing in all the teams, and we traveled to America. Andrew Gaze was my coach at the time, all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And I was playing basketball like crazy, literally 7 days a week, twice a day for 5 of those days. And I just didn't have a normal teenage sort of life, really. And I really remember that all I wanted to do was chase girls, go and party and have fun. And I actually think that kind of fed into the start of my problems a little bit, because anytime I got the opportunity to go and drink or smoke weed or whatever, I was all in.
But you're letting your hair down, I think, because
Correct.
knowing a lot of people that had similar sort of stories, maybe not, going to the US or whatever, but playing football or basketball at an elite level, it's a full-time job. My cousin did it. He was at the MSAC at 6 a.m. before he'd go to school and all that sort of stuff.
That's right.
So it is like you're working a full-time job like you're also being a teenager. So you do want to let your hair down.
That's right. And it is like, I've worked with plenty of professional athletes, in actual professional careers, and it's the same for them. They do have problems, or they can be very susceptible to problems because it kind of gets set up as such a binge thing, and there's no sort of I don't know how to explain it.
But you have to have an addictive nature to be good at that, to get up out of bed. So you've got to throw yourself in all or nothing.
Correct.
Which I guess lends itself to addiction.
Correct. So, and that's kind of what happened to me. So, I guess it was like a gateway. Smoked pot with my mates, got it off their older brother, behind Chatty, fucking one Easter Monday or something, I think it was. And the thing that I can always remember about my drug use was that I was always really fucking scared and nervous to do it. But then as soon as I did it, I just fucking loved it and I wanted to do it all the time. And that's kind of what happened to me. So as soon as I smoked pot, I was it was pretty regular pretty quickly. And by the time I got to that end stage of my junior playing, I was smoking pot every day and doing other drugs on the weekend, just partying, all fun, all nothing really affected. But then the thing that sort of was the changing point, I was 17. We went to America on a little basketball tour, and I was just so fucking naive that I didn't know about being dependent or anything like that. So I had my first detox on the plane to America. I remember feeling really shit, all that sort of stuff. But I guess significantly, my mind had just sort of changed about what I wanted to do with my life, who I was, all that sort of stuff. And when I came back, I gave up, all my basketball, and just in my head, I wanted to just go and be a normal teenager and party and have fun and chase girls and all that kind of stuff.
Which happens to a lot of people, especially ones that might have burnt out a little bit early. You realise it's not for you, and then you go on the road 100%. And you feel like, fuck, man, if this is what being a professional athlete's about, I'm not really about it.
Yeah.
Which totally makes sense.
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess then you progress to other drugs, and then you start to feel like you've got an actual problem. I guess that's the first step of figuring out, of getting help would be actually understanding.
Yeah, it's really weird. And that's what I talk to people, particularly families and stuff. It's not actually the problem part of it, in a way, is not actually about the use itself. It's more about all the other shit that comes along with it.
The lying to family.
Correct.
Stealing, or whatever you do to feed your habit.
Correct. So even though probably I was addicted or dependent for a long time before I felt it was an actual problem. And kind of by the time I felt like it was a problem and I didn't want to be doing what I was doing anymore, it was almost too late. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
I think that
fuck.
would happen to a lot of people, because you're surrounding yourselves with other individuals that do the same thing, and if you've got a problem, they've got a problem, and no one wants to be like that. Yeah,
100%. So, and I remember for me, so the basketball thing was significant because I'm not academic at all, really. And I wasn't interested in anything else besides sport and socializing and all that sort of stuff.
And kids can go through school if you're good at sport without really doing any fucking schoolwork, can't you?
And that's pretty much what, and I was only at public schools and stuff, but that's kind of what I was doing, and everyone was just sort of okay with it because I was, playing sport at a reasonable level. But then when that all fell away, I don't know, I got kicked out of Bentley High School or asked to leave or whatever, and then I went to Sandy. I don't know what it's like at the moment, but
I went to Sandy for
a year and a half. Yeah. It's I don't know. It was just different to Bentley. There was all these free periods. If you didn't go to school, nobody was fucking ringing you.
They had the students had their own car park.
That's right.
The teachers would be like, teacher, when they go to the smoking area. I'm probably a bit older than you.
Well, there still was the smoke. So I think there wasn't our own car park, but you could drive and park in the school.
When I was there, you could park in that middle bit, that's where you could park there.
Yeah. So people used to do that. And then, there was the alleyway where everybody smoked. And it was cool. cool. Like teachers would just walk up and down and not saying, like, it was totally cool. And I think it was kind of like a art school, right?
It was,
like
there was different, you could do, I did like art, studio arts, visual arts, media production. You could do all this stuff that a lot of smaller schools just couldn't offer.
That's right. So that was like, but then there was a lot of people like me that just went there to sort of just take advantage of doing.
Then there was multiple. I remember being there as a kid. There was, well, not say a kid, like you're 17 or 16 or whatever.
Yeah.
There was multiple weed dealers there. Like you could, like there was like people do you different. Like you'll get a cheaper rate from this guy, and that, like there was no shortage of finding it.
Well, and that's kind of what happened to me. So I went there. Don't get me wrong. I was still like knocking around and doing stuff and getting in mischief and whatever. But it just introduced me to a whole bunch of different people. And I just remember that time of my life, to be honest. It was fucking fun and exciting. I had a blast. Like every day I was just getting up, we're missioning around on the train, doing all this shit. It was awesome. I loved it. I had so much fun.
How funny is it though? Like, because it was such a big school, just year 11 and 12.
That's right. Yeah.
You'll meet somebody who's in the same year level as you, that went there the same time as you, that you'd never ever seen. You'll meet them and you're like, oh yeah, we actually went, and you're like, I didn't fucking know who they were because they just hung out in a different spot.
That's right. I didn't. Yeah. So, and in the end, I literally was just going to school. It was just like the meeting point.
It was a social spot
to then go and do whatever and have fun. So yeah, that kind of happened. And really, like, to be honest, my drug use, like, just it all just happened really quickly, and I was kind of into it, pretty fast, doing all different types of drugs like regularly, and just like progressed, and you just meet like different people and different circles. And
it's interesting because it happens to a lot of kids that are gifted athletes, because they sort of, when that happens, and if it may not, for you just decided you didn't want to play sport much anymore, but for a lot of people it might mean they do an ACL, or they didn't get picked up for this thing that they'd been aiming for or whatever, and they become a little bit fucking lost. Yeah. 100%. And then they just fall into that stuff. It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing that I wish, right, like, so still to this day, to be honest with you, even though there's been a few people, no one that I played with directly ever made it real big in basketball, but I used to play against Jack Watts in basketball, who ended up playing footy pretty seriously, but no one else really made it big. But so I would see people that went to college that I played with and stuff like that. And I never really felt like, this is like once I was, clean myself up or whatever, I never really felt like, oh fuck, I wish I had done that. But do you know what? I wish that I had kept playing footy. And that's the biggest thing. Like when I was younger, I wish I just had kind of like a mentor, just someone that would have just said to me, just like, I did enjoy basketball, but I loved playing footy, and I love footy now. I wish someone just had said, just keep playing footy if you like that.
And
if
you're 6'6", you could just play in the ruck, palming those little balls down. Like, that would have been all right, man.
Yeah, I still go now and think, fuck, this is awesome. What a life that would be. Yeah.
So obviously you're taking drugs recreationally. You get to the point where you go, well, is there that for someone who's not really in this sort of rehab scene, and some people watching will probably be like, you fucking should go to rehab, you drink too much. That's my own issue, but people always say you kind of got to hit rock bottom before you decide to make a change. Is that kind of how your story played out, or not? Really?
Yeah, but so I've had so many, like, that's been something significant for me over the last sort of like 5 years. I've gone through a lot of like changes in how I think about it, my own identity, how I think about my own story, my own addiction, and it's come through meeting, not only people with personal experience, but like researchers and, seeing how policy works and all that sort of stuff. And it is true that someone can hit a really bad point in their life, and that creates like a window of opportunity, a realization, light bulb moment that they're like, fuck, something's not right. But the whole rock bottom thing is just like a fallacy, really, because everybody has a different rock bottom. And just because you hit it, if you're addicted, doesn't mean that you're gonna just go, all right, well, I'm gonna stop now. That's kind of the nature of addiction, is you're doing something that you don't want to do, and you're not in control of it, and it's happening almost like despite of you in a way,
Do you find that, and look, in Melbourne there's a lot of people that have more money than other people. Do you find that some people, their families kind of enable it to a point that they're not out on the street, they're not doing it that tough because their parents kind of sweep it under the rug? Like personally, I know some people growing up that I think they'll always be okay and they can manage their addictions, but because their kind of family are letting them do that to an extent. Because what else do you do? Kick your kids out.
Well, yes, but this is where this is where it gets so hard, because the conversation is complicated, right? So I always like to separate it in between public health, so thinking about drugs and alcohol from an overall population health perspective, and then someone's own individual journey with it, and how they want to kind of approach the situation, right? And I just think we almost need to kind of stop thinking about it as addiction in a way, and just think about, how much harm is this causing in my life? Can I live with this level of harm? Am I happy with it personally for me, the consequences? How is this affecting the people around me? Are they comfortable with it? What messages are they giving me? And I think if you come at it and approach it like that, you'd get just so much better results with people, because there wouldn't just be this oh fuck, I'm addicted, I have to do this, or I'm not addicted, I'm not bad enough yet. And if we just thought about it more how is it affecting you? Does that sort of make sense?
It does. But I think a lot of people with their addictions, they feel that they're only harming themselves, so they legitimize it. They go, well, I'm just having a few beers, I'm just doing this, I'm just smoking on, whatever they're doing. They say, I think when they realize it's hurting other people, that's when they, I guess, should have some sort of empathy for their family and friends, and think this is not just affecting me now, this is affecting them. Couldn't agree more. And that's why I think just overall, the conversation has to depoliticize, and it also has to, there's this really interesting guy, Dr. Carl Hart, I think I'm getting his name right. He's basically this whiz bang smart ass scientist guy. He's been on Joe Rogan and stuff, but he's a drug researcher, very intelligent, normal guy, but he uses heroin socially and stuff like that, right? And he has this really interesting kind of philosophy and books and stuff like that talks about we need to have a more mature conversation around drugs and alcohol. And 100%, if it is affecting other people, those other people can communicate that and put their boundaries up and stuff like that. But this is the thing that sort of shocks a lot of people, is that there is a lot of people that actually use drugs socially and it doesn't affect other people, right? But they might not talk about it or communicate when things kind of go wrong, because there is the stigma around it, you know. So it's kind of weird, because some people then go that's fucked, you can't say people use ice socially, and I'm I think, look, anyone who's a grown up can make their own decisions and whatever. If you make a bad one, you make a bad one. It's the Joe Rogan thing's interesting that you mentioned that, because he's obviously one of the most influential people in the world, and he often talks about DMT and hallucinogens, whatever, but he says, I've never done coke. And so kids are listening to him, and he's saying DMT, mushrooms, acid's cool, coke's not, right? Whatever. He's allowed to say whatever he wants. But that must have an impact on people worldwide.
100% it does.
100%
it does. And I guess this is why I wish that everybody could just have the real conversation about drugs and alcohol in society. There's the obvious stuff, everybody knows that alcohol, hands down, is the most harmful substance to the human population going around, right?
But it's also the most accepted.
Correct, right? So, and that's such a strange, phenomena, right? But then things like marijuana and stuff like that, have a very low harm that they have on the community and individuals themselves and all that stuff. But that's and that's shifting and changing.
People, look, I know that I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that people think that weed is harmless, and a lot of, all the weed heads will probably tell me to shut up. But if you're predisposed to some sort of mental illness, it can bring that on. And I've seen it happen. Correct. I think a lot of people it's happened to.
True.
I'm not saying it's going to fuck everyone up, but it does eventually to some people.
I 100% agree. But it's the whole conversation around vaping at the moment, right? Makes me laugh so much. And I've been involved in talking to the TGA and stuff like that about the whole thing, right? And we just, I'm not saying that just to give as many drugs as we can to people and make it as accessible, because I think our experience with alcohol shows that it fucks people up, right? But taking this like kind of prohibition approach to it is actual madness, because every example that we've had of that is crazy. So like with vaping, they're just about to, or they have made it prescription only. All that's going to do 100% is create a massive black market.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be doing it, right? Because the reality is no matter what we say, the laws that we put in place, highly desirable products, people want to use them, and they've been doing that to change and alter their state since the dawn of time. Mm-hmm. And if we can just have like a different conversation about it in society and just kind of go, these are the effects of it and this is kind of what can happen and all that sort of stuff, then people are going to be more likely, if things do start to go wrong, to sort of put their hand up and say, hey, it's going wrong.
I think the government's definitely trying to take their slice of the pie with that, and they're sort of passing it off with, oh, we're trying to do it for everyone's health and well-being. I don't buy that as much. You know what I mean? Like they're seeing lost revenue.
Oh, I think it's a mixture of things. I think one of the big things is that it kind of gets votes, you know. Anytime you can kind of go, we're saving the children, we're banning vapes.
But see, what will happen is all these ones without flavour will come out, the people get their prescription, then they'll just buy the flavour that'll add to it. It's just it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, just changing the problem.
Yeah, 100%.
But
so
the people are adults. If they want to suck down some smelly water or vapor, whatever it fucking is, they're allowed to, I think.
That's right. And so when it comes to like addiction, I think the bigger thing is just, and without sounding like too much of a radical, it's more about like addressing just how like our society operates and how we, you know, funnel people into different, you know, consumeristic kind of models, which I like to buy shit as well, don't get me wrong. But, you know,
can't avoid it though.
The way that our society's set up is kind of isolating people. It's just stripping back all the stuff that makes people healthy, that humans need on a base level to feel okay psychologically, emotionally, and mentally as well. And just on that point before, so if I think about myself, like with meth, I remember the first time I was smoking speed, and meth was like, it was starting to be like around a lot, but there was still like speed around. Now I'm pretty sure you can't even really get like any speed or anything. Probably you can, but pretty much not. And I remember there was ads on the TV at that time where it would be like someone smoking meth, and then they'd be like throwing chairs through like windows and stuff like that. If you just have like one puff or you do it once, this is what's going to happen to you. And I remember when I did it, I was fucking scared as, because it was like that thing like, oh, someone that uses meth is,
you
like,
think you're going to flick a switch and you'll be an addict and it's all over.
I thought it was going to be kind of like, like a crazy werewolf monster type thing, right? And I remember I had it. That didn't happen. I had the time of my life. It was fucking awesome. And I remember consciously thinking like the next day or whatever, going, that's like fucking bullshit. Like what?
So you think that's counterproductive because they're showing you what could happen, and when it doesn't happen, you're like, actually, I can handle this shit.
100%, 100%. And I know that's like particularly like for parents and all that sort of stuff, it's confronting. But again, when you just like lead with honesty and you say like, hey, there is like some people that have used this and they don't get addicted straight away, or they don't get addicted at all, or they do it every now and then, and it's actually not a problem in their life. But the reason it's not a problem in their life is because they have all this healthy stuff going on in the rest of their life, you know. And if you just have that honest conversation with people are still going to do it, but they're informed when they're doing it.
I guess, and like I'm a parent now, my kid's young, and I know you're a parent, but it leads you to you want to be supportive, but you don't want to be too supportive, you know? So it 100%. Leaves you in this balancing act of like, okay, if you are going to do drugs, it's not going to ruin your life straight away, but it could, you know what I mean? It's a fucking hard thing for a parent to do.
100%. And there is like again, there is amazing like educational programs and stuff out there that can help parents, teachers, all this kind of stuff to have like the conversation, but we just don't hear about it because you turn on the news and the stories that people
sensationalists,
go with. Correct.
Like, Icehead has done this,
Yeah.
Which sort of leads me to another thing, like when you say some people can use drugs and it doesn't affect them too much.
Yeah.
There must be a constant sort of, what's the word? There must be a lot of people that do have issues. There's got to be a consistency that there might be trauma in their past or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
Yes. So, but I don't actually think, well, partly. So this is where it gets complicated. And this is part of the evolution that I've had in my own journey, which is really interesting. And now what we do with people, which we're finding that we're getting like really good results with, is so just to quickly explain. So at the end of my addiction, I guess you could say I was at the pointy end. I was intravenously using meth. I was taking prescription pills, smoking pot, drinking all the time, just a fucking mess, right? And I was young and I went to rehab and turned it around and was really lucky. The process that I went through was like a 12-step recovery model, which basically looks at addiction as a brain disease and essentially says, to put it really simplistically, that if you are an addict and you're addicted, that you're going to be addicted for life, even if you're sober, right? And to counteract that, there's like, it's a spiritual solution, and that you're going to have to kind of go to like 12-step meetings and be actively engaged in talking about your addiction and recovery for the rest of your life, right? You say that to people and that's fucking daunting.
Yeah,
right?
It is. It's like, if I understand personally that I probably have an issue with alcohol, I drink too much. But if you said you could never have a drink ever again, I'm going to run for the hills.
Correct.
But if you said you could manage it and maybe don't drink every day, just drink 4 nights a week or blah, 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 then it starts to become a little bit more acceptable to these people that are addicted.
Yeah, 100%. So, and that's what we see happens a lot with people. Like, there is some people that flourish in that 12-step model, but the majority, and again, it's really hard because there's not really any good evidence to kind of show what the
it's all there really was for a long time, wasn't it?
Correct. It's kind of like the original shot at, and there's lots of good stuff in there. But so I went through that process. I was fucked, so I just kind of like swallowed it and made that my life and did that. But there was things right from the start that, you know, like just didn't kind of sit right with me. Well, never drinking again was one, all this sort of jazz, right? And sort of in the last like 5 to 7 years, that sort of changed and shifted for me. So I did not drink, or I was stone cold sober for fucking nearly 10 years, right? But I started meeting a whole bunch of different people, you know, like academic professors, other people that had done recovery different ways, that did drink or did do drugs like socially or whatever it was. And I started to kind of see things in a different light. And 100%, there's no sort of one size fits all thing that kind
individual,
of there's no like perfect little condom packet that goes over everyone's head that, you know, helps them to understand addiction and all that. And that sort of translates into you know, that whole thing about like trauma and stuff, is that yes, it definitely seems to indicate, the research, that trauma is prevalent for a lot of people that do have addiction, but it's also prevalent in a lot of people that experience, you know, adverse like financial situations growing up, come from all different types of background, all this kind of stuff. And as we said at the start, addiction doesn't discriminate as well. A lot of the people that I work with don't have any trauma in their life, significant trauma, and it's kind of occurred as a habitual, you know, process in their life, right? And they're just as badly addicted and doing crazy shit as the person that had some horrific fucking thing happen to them, you know. So
because it can affect everybody. But you've got to think, I guess, from your personal story. You said that, you know, you had family and stuff. So you can come out of rehab, and I guess, which obviously it costs money, which, as well.
Yeah.
So you can come out of that and you're not necessarily surrounding yourselves. Like, obviously you cut off the people that you're using meth with and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Some people, they don't have that luxury. I guess they come
Correct.
out and they're thrown back into where they, the company you keep could be very detrimental.
Correct. And this is why I think the process of recovery is really challenging, because it's a multifaceted thing. And I guess if you were to put it in like categories, different people can have different challenges in different categories that make it harder or whatever, right? And I guess for me, when someone comes to me and says that they have an addiction, the drug use is like the last thing that I think about, right? Because you kind of got to work from it backwards, because if you fix all the other stuff, the drug use transcends, because they're not trying to escape through like the substance anymore. And that's a big thing. They call them social determinants of health. So do you have a place to live? Do you have good family support? Do you have a good financial situation? All that stuff.
Yep.
It significantly impacts someone's chance to recover. And that's where I feel incredibly lucky that, I do have good family support.
And I guess that's something that some people, they might be coming from a situation where their family used drugs with them.
That's right.
Which is, it's horrible for them. Like, how would you come out of that and you're still surrounded by it?
Yeah, 100%.
And I know people that have come out of those situations and then gone, and their families are still using drugs. You're like, you don't stand a chance, man.
100%. And look, again, this is why I just think more broadly, if you separate them, there's the individual like approach that you take with people to look at someone's situation holistically and go, these are a range of different things that you need to do. But just from like a societal perspective, is like, how can we just increase like a more healthy society so that people are having more opportunities to experience like a healthy upbringing with good, like stable, parents.
It's a big challenge.
100%.
But that's what's going to happen. I guess, so with anybody who's suffering that, to just go away for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and I've never looked into it, but I'm presuming it costs tens of thousands of dollars type scenario. So that isn't an option for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think, like you're saying before, that we just think that rehab, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
So I guess there's got to be an option for people that don't have that luxury and that can change their habits with, I guess, talking to someone like you, or even just online, or making some sort of start.
Yeah. So it's shifting and changing these days, which is cool. But really, and again, this is why I'm always so big on like the stigma stuff, trying to change the way that we talk about it, change the language of people, because it all feeds into this whole stereotype, which then all feeds into the amount of money that flows from government into services and stuff to help people. But unfortunately, the system in drugs and alcohol is fucked, right?
So if somebody, sorry to cut you off, but if somebody has an issue and they really know they have a problem, they don't have any family support, they don't have any money behind them, they might be on the dole or whatever, and they go to a bulk billing GP and say, I have heroin addiction, I've got a meth addiction, whatever, do they not offer them really any help except here's some morphine or this is the program? Like, what is the protocol?
Not essentially. So I guess that public health stream, again, stigma plays so much into it. It's something that public health officials are working on all the time, is trying to get GPs and doctors to recognize someone as like an addicted person that comes into their clinic and fucking help them. Because often what happens is that they go, we don't want those fucking people here, right? But what is meant to happen, and what does happen, is that you go to the GP, you'll get a referral into like the specialized alcohol and drug treatment system, which is existent in all parts of Australia, chronically underfunded, but is existent.
So they are afforded the opportunity to go to a rehab for 20 days or whatever. Yeah.
But the challenge in that is, again, system's so chronically underfunded. It's designed by a bunch of fucking pencil pushers, right?
That have never touched drugs in their life.
It's so fucking complicated. I try and navigate it for people sometimes, and I'm like a normal guy. I find it fucking hard, and I have like connections and stuff like that in the industry. Often what happens, so in Victoria, there's now a centralized intake system because the sector's so chronically underfunded. There's not enough workers to be able to, meet the demand of that intake. So you could go to the GP, get a referral for an assessment, and have to wait a month.
You could OD in that time. You could. Your family's left you like
Correct.
that. There is. If someone hits the point where they want to go to rehab, they should be able to go check in right fucking then.
Correct. So if I had a magic wand and we couldn't fix too much, but we could only work within the system that we had and not be able to change policies and all that stuff, that's the first thing I would do is increase the access that people have to treatment, because we know that 100% that is such a big determining factor of someone getting help, is them actually being able to access
And while
it.
they've got this anxious time of waiting, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to turn to the thing that they're dependent to.
Correct.
So that I guess it's a flawed system, but I guess at least we offer free services like that, which I guess a lot of other countries probably don't.
Correct. And to to give everyone a little story, so I was just with someone that runs the Alcohol and Drug Foundation, which is the major preventative health organisation in Australia for alcohol and drugs. There's this massive international conference that happens. I forget what it's called. I think it's the CNDC, right? Anyway, all the nations meet together and they just talk about different stuff that's happening in drug policy. She went to the prevention part of the conference, and she walked in, and the Russian guy, she told me, was talking about sending people to Siberia if they found out that they had a drug problem. And she genuinely like stopped for a second, and she thought, like I'm in the wrong room or whatever. And she looked around, and she was like, oh no, it says prevention,
Wow.
Like, so that is the perspective, is that there's a long way to go, but all that being said, we are kind of privileged if you compare it to
in
the
any
rest
sort
of
of
the world.
healthcare
Correct.
situation.
Correct.
So when you talk about addiction, and people often think about drugs, in all kinds of party drugs, hard drugs, alcohol, which is very, very normalized in Australia. But gambling's a massive one as well.
Huge.
And like I know that as someone who still does enjoy a punt.
Yeah.
And for my family, my family's done it forever, races and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Me too. My family's are bookies. The Nagel Stan was at Caulfield for a while there.
There you go. Yeah. My grandpa was also a bookie, one at the pub though, one of the illegal ones, not far from here in Port Melbourne, but it's been part of my family's culture for a long time. It is now so fucking in your face that I think it has to reach a turning point soon.
Yeah.
And like if I decided I didn't want to gamble, like a million people have, imagine just wanting to watch your team play footy or whatever, and you have this stuff just thrown in your face all the time. Like it's just not right, man.
So I wish I had the stats. I recently on our podcast interviewed this guy Tony Clarkson, who's the head of the Victorian gambling thing.
I've listened to this,
yeah, and the stat, I'm not very good with stats, but I think it averages out to about 32 ads every hour. Every 20,
and it shouldn't be in the actual broadcast, I believe, as well.
Shocking.
And I know now they kind of have a bit of a loophole where it is an ad, and then Nathan Brown will be like, all right, and these are the odds happening here because it's not in the but it's like.
So Australia definitely has some of the loosest laws in the world around gambling advertising, and we know from all accounts, and again, this is why I never used to know any of this stuff, but this is why all the public health stuff is actually important. And it's not about, being a fucking party pooper, because I like to have a bet, I like to have a beer, all that stuff, right? But we know that gambling ads during sporting coverage, alcohol advertising, grand final day, domestic violence increases by 50%. All this stuff, like, we know, we just know how much of an impact it has on people.
And it has to. And also, like, I think a lot of the big sporting codes, they are okay with it because they know, okay, say it's Fremantle GWS on a Saturday
Yeah.
Now, people aren't going to watch that from a normal viewer's perspective.
That's right.
But when there's gambling involved, they probably, a lot more people are going to tune into that. And a lot more people are going to pay attention.
Yeah.
And they even have like the official gaming partner and stuff like that. They got to fucking sort that out.
This was ages ago. We did a podcast with this guy, Alan Christensen. He used to play for Geelong and then he went to Brisbane and had that big gambling story and all that. Is doing great stuff in the space. But I actually flew up there to do it with him at the Gabba, which was really cool. But I remember it was really kind of a strange thing, and he couldn't say anything at the time. But he was just saying to me off the mic, he was just like, "I can't, like, this is crazy," because the club was supporting him to like do this podcast to talk about gambling harm and all this stuff. But then their major sponsor that came on that year was like Ned's or something, you know, and then like he would like run out with the jumper on, but then he was like doing all these
talk
articles.
About mixed signals for kids, though, and this is the thing: kids find sports people, so they idolize them.
Yeah.
And when they're wearing that jumper with that on it, like it's I just don't think that's cool, and I reckon something needs to change with that sort of stuff. Gambling should be, anyone is allowed to gamble, but I just don't think it should be so pushed down everyone's throat.
100%. And like, it is kind of frightening. Like, there's, having seen this now at the policy level, like we've only just got a few things changed around, like alcohol and advertising in sport and everywhere else with alcohol, and it's still like really bad. But now there's all like digital media, which they're just so behind on, all this stuff. So it really is rife. And you're right. Like, so there's, people would probably say to me, if I laid out what I would love to be able to do with all that stuff, they would probably say, you're a radical. But your everyday Joe can just be like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, we like to have a punt, but seriously, come on.
But look, each to their own. But I just feel for people that are trying to remove that from their lives, because they might have lost their fucking house or their partner's left them or whatever. They can't pay their child support, and they just want to watch the football, or they're just tuning into the whatever, and they get that rammed down their throat. I just think that that's not really cool.
No, not at all.
As somebody who still does punt myself, I just think it's not right.
Couldn't agree with you.
And it's like, I watch the NBA and stuff, and it's like America's pretty far behind with that sports stuff, and now they're starting to, it's obviously legalized in more places. But I remember going to the States 10, 15 years ago, trying to tell people there we could go to any pub anywhere and you could bet on any sport you wanted, and they thought that was bizarre. Like, you had to go to Vegas then, but now it seems like they're legalizing it more, and I think they're digging themselves into a hole there.
100%. And the other one is the pokey. So I don't because I didn't even know this. I found this out like about a year ago. So I don't shop at Woolworths anymore. Because they're the other than the casinos, they're the biggest owner of like poker machines in the country, and it's just shown time and time again that like there's not really a social element that happens with pokies. Like, pretty much everybody that plays pokies is really struggling, and they actively fucking target people
totally
that are struggling.
I've got a theory with pokies, and the pub around the corner backs this up. Every single suburban pub with pokies that I can think of that's in the sort of inner city area is next to, adjacent to, or within a 2-minute stroll of like high-rise housing commission sort of places. Like, pretty much all of them. They're across the road. They're right there. And I think that that's not a coincidence.
No.
Which is fucking really, really, really sad.
I know. And I agree. And it's the same with alcohol, well, there was that case recently in the NT where, again, Woolworths, I think it was a Dan Murphy's, they wanted to open it near like a dry community. And the whole community said no, that everybody said no, but they like forced it through and wanted to open it. And it wasn't until it got like national media attention. But there was no other way that you could look at that and say they were putting it there, like, because that's where like vulnerable people would be, so. And don't get me wrong, I'm like, I have too many beers still to this day sometimes, but like, I just think you're right. It's when it's wrong is when it just crosses the line into.
They're putting these things there because so they know vulnerable people aren't strong enough, and that's just. it's kicking people when they're down more than anything.
100%.
And yeah, the whole pokies thing, like I don't mind gambling, but I think pokies are horrible.
Yeah.
There was a pub. I lived in St Kilda for a lot of my life, and there was a pub that was open. I lived on Chapel. There was a pub that was open after 1 o'clock, so we'd be going out somewhere and we'd come back and we'd have a beer. And when the lockdown happened, I thought this is probably one of the only positive things we had out of lockdown is I thought all these people that played the pokies all the time, it'll break their habit for them and force it to. Yeah. And I would sit there at the bar, talk to some of the bar staff, and I'm like, as soon as things changed, all those people came back again, like nothing changed, which is super sad, you know? That was like a forced rehab for them.
I know. It is like, yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I think that's the message that we have to give with people, because I think sometimes people can think like you're just trying to wreck the fun, but it's like, it's not that. It's just stopping the crazy amount of advertising, the preying on vulnerable people, and just the way that we talk about it in society. And then you can let people be people, and people can do whatever the fuck they want to do.
Yeah, so that sort of leads me to something. So, like, you've said that you still drink and whatever, but I think a lot of people that I know that have come out of rehab, they don't, because they know that I'll have a few beers and then I'll have a line, and then before you know it, it's Wednesday and I'm back to doing my own old things. So do you feel that you're just managing it better? Is that how it...
Yeah, so good question. So yeah, I don't, or first thing I'll say is that if you're doing what you just described, you've had a really serious problem with drugs and alcohol, you don't want to do it anymore, fucking fine, like awesome. Love it. That's the best thing. You should do that. That's great. Like, I'm not trying to talk anyone into doing something that doesn't work for them, but I've found the far majority of people don't want to do that, and a lot of people don't even get to rehab because they're scared off by the prospect of that in the first place. So for me, I don't believe that you're like anybody is like an addict, right? And I think what we should stop calling people that. Like, I believe that 100% people have addictive like tendencies, right? But I think it's on a spectrum, and I think it's everything else that impacts that. And the conversation needs to start being around, mental health, managing your good and having really good mental health that then impacts and can play out with like your addiction as well, right? So, and I think like in that 12-step thing, a thing that happened to me for a long time was that even though I was like sober for 10 years, I was telling myself that I was an addict every day and identifying like that, and it became part of my identity. So
the drugs are still consuming you to a point because you're still letting them rule your life.
Correct. So, and it was really interesting when I went through that shift of not thinking about myself like that anymore, that, don't get me wrong, I can still drink too much, and there's been times where I've gotten drunk where I didn't want to, or I didn't intend on that night or whatever, right? But I no longer have that thing that when I used to have that bad, but when I take a drug that I just want to fucking have another one.
But do you think with you're helping people that because you've come from that, it makes people feel that you're a little bit more legitimate? Like, do you know what I mean?
I think so,
Rather than just someone sitting there who's got a degree in whatever saying, oh, well, just don't do it, you know?
100%, I think so. And it did for me. So that was the thing that helped me to turn it around, was the person that I spoke to had a completely different story from me. They were actually like really hoity-toity, just drank alcohol, and they were from fucking Toorak, I think. But he explained to me just like how he thought and felt and all that stuff. And I never heard anybody talk like that before. And I was like, fuck, that is exactly how I think, feel, all that stuff. And that didn't fix me, but what it did was sort of open up the door of trust for me to kind of believe him, essentially, and go, maybe this can work for me too. And then engaging in the therapy and stuff on that level, and then I was able to kind of get better, if that makes sense.
So you think the therapy is probably the biggest thing rather than the physical addiction?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So 100%. There's a withdrawal process that needs to happen for most drugs. But if you talk to most people, there's a point or they can regularly, they can stop, right? Staying stopped and feeling happy about it is the tricky part.
Yeah.
You know?
Because a lot of people, I guess, with those sort of personalities will fill one void with another sort of thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And I guess that's what people have to learn, new procedures to make sure that they don't do that.
Correct. And I always say to people, so to give like, even though there's not, to give the one size fits all condom to someone, right? What I sort of would prescribe to people is that I would say, hey, you've crossed the invisible red line, and this is not like, this is an addictive pattern now, and you have to acknowledge that and accept it. We need to go a good period of time off it, right? At least 6 months, but preferably like 12 months or longer.
Mm-hmm. And this is off all drugs. Like if they have a problem with meth, are they still allowed to have a beer?
I would say try and get off all drugs for at least 6 months, right?
Because one will lead to the other?
Correct.
Yep.
And also it's kind of about like that biochemical process that's happening in your system, because that's real as well, like that physical side of it. But that's not just for the sake of getting sober. What that is to allow you to do is to have that blank canvas to actually then engage in the therapy. Like identity is such a big thing with this stuff that nobody talks about, but I think it's like one of the biggest things. Rebuild your identity, find out.
Because if you're known as that guy who was always partying, now you need to figure out what you're...
Correct.
What
Correct.
Gives you, yeah.
And it's not like you'd walk around thinking, oh, I'm the drug addict identity. It's like unconscious stuff, but it's there for a lot of people. So to work through all of that, to build your life back up, create like a cool life that you don't want to lose, you know, all that stuff.
Yep.
And then if you want to, after that period of time, then we can look at like reintroducing alcohol or substances back into your life
in a controlled
way. And like, let's have some really clear fucking boundaries and, you know, rules about what that looks like and all that sort of stuff. Not so that we can go, oh, you're an addict, you can't do it anymore, but just so that we know when we've gone too far and we might need to reset, all that stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's good now that there's a lot more zero alcohol beer and all that sort of
100%.
stuff. So when people want to go to a, you know, they might have an engagement, they can take that and people aren't shunning them. You know, I think a while ago people would have been like, what are you doing drinking that? No, you don't drink that. It's fucking... So now people can just drink that stuff and they can still feel like they're doing the fair income Aussie thing.
Yeah, 100%. And when I first got sober, that was one of the more annoying things, is that when you went out and you said you weren't drinking, I'm not a fucking physical specimen. I'm scarred off alcohol forever. So I couldn't say like, oh, I'm training. People would just sort of know that you had an issue with it. And then, you know, not because they're being rude, but they would just like be inquisitive and ask you a question or something. And then you find yourself kind of lying or explaining your fucking story or whatever. And it's just shit, you know. So I think the culture around that changing has been really cool to see.
And I've noticed a lot of people, like I'm 40 myself, and people that are my age or even younger, and some people that are older that have said, we just don't drink anymore. Like I know some people that just go, nah, just don't anymore. And they're people that are even in the booze industry, they're just like, well, I decided it's not for me. And I just don't think we were seeing that 10 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Couldn't agree with you more. So if I could ask you a question, you said a couple of times, oh, I drink too much, right? We don't have to go into how much or whatever, but like, how would you feel if you were like feeling depressed or something, right, for a couple of weeks? Maybe the alcohol was impacting on it, but that's not really the core thing. It's because of something else. And you came to me and you told me how much you drank, and you said, yeah, I think I drink a little bit too much. And I said, oh, well, you're an alcoholic, right? How would you feel? Like,
I would agree with you. I am an alcoholic.
So you think you're an alcoholic?
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And you're comfortable with like saying it like that?
It's a funny scenario. So for years, I DJ'd, and that's all I did, which obviously alcohol plays a big part in that. I'm going out and whatever.
Yeah.
Then I started doing this other thing, like I've run the trivia business, which then was also encouraging booze. So for the last 15, 20 years, I've been working in bars and nightclubs and drinking, and we're encouraging drinking.
Yeah.
So from an early age, I was the guy who had all the drink cards to give them out to people. Like do you know what I mean? It's been like that. And so then I've got to a stage now when I'm old enough to probably know better.
Yeah.
And I have stopped drinking as much because I'm not partying all the time.
Yeah.
But I still stay at home and I'll watch the footy and whatever, have a drink. My partner drinks.
Yeah.
My neighbour across the road.
Yeah.
It's I do it too much. I'll be the first to admit it. Which I know that I am an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But if something drastically happened, I think I could be like, okay.
Yeah.
I need to, you know.
So, and because it's interesting to me because, you know, like I'm aware, I always like never want to lose touch with all this stuff and talk to people. And a lot of the people I talk to are coming because shit's going wrong in their life and whatever. But like, does that sit comfortably with you to like describe it like that? Or is it better to just say like, yeah, sometimes I drink too much, you know?
Well, I'm just going to call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think most of the people that know me well, they're like, yeah, he's always having a beer.
Yeah.
I don't feel, and this is, I don't feel that it's ruined my life.
Yeah.
So that's why I guess I'm still cool with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, who knows? One day I did dry July 5 years ago. It popped up on Facebook the other day.
Yeah.
So that was a trying month, but I have gone some stints.
Do you think like if you really wanted to, and you just made a lot for whatever reason, that you could just stop?
Like I did that 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And my neighbour, who I drink with pretty much all the time, he's doing dry July right now.
Yeah.
And so he'll have a non-alcoholic beer. I'll have a non-alcoholic beer with him just to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So I think I could, but I just I don't know. It's part of me, and I sort of enjoy it.
Yeah.
Which is the thing, you know.
Me too.
But, and like when I drive, like tonight, you know, I had a beer before we were here, but I just have a water. I've got to drive home. Like it's not like I'm drinking first thing in the morning. Yeah, it's more of, you know, that, and I feel like I've built myself into this life where I can kind of do that.
Yeah, yeah.
But
it's interesting, right? Like, and to me, like, and I just think this is where we have to like get it with people is just like. To just stop like that moralization, like, because you're saying that to me and I'm like, oh, so the alcohol guidelines, you probably drink more than the alcohol guidelines, right? But is that actually really a problem, right? You know,
everyone's kind of different, and like I feel like it is like I've got a lot of tattoos of beers. I don't know, it's just a part of me. I enjoy that. I don't drink spirits. I don't really take any other drugs. Just drink beers,
yeah. There you go. Right? Yeah, it's interesting. I'm on the addiction podcast. I feel like I'm telling people it's fucking okay to do drugs and drink and whatever.
Let's talk about your actual podcast, because it's been a great chat, but we haven't even got there. So, Real Drug Talk. So you came up with this during lockdown?
No. So, well, the podcast, yes. But so just like what kind of happened, and it's been a part of my personal evolution as well, is that, I had my own problem, went into working in rehabs and treatment centers. And then what happened was, which was a fucking horrible experience. In a lot of ways, I wish I never did it, to be honest with you, but I did. And it was good for some career stuff though. But like when the inverted commas ice epidemic happened, I did a story with like the Herald Sun. They plastered me all over the front page. I was like, had a 2-page spread, and then I did every single media outlet in Australia in like the next week, which was full on. And that was really like, I didn't enjoy it. There was a lot of like stuff that came back that just wasn't personally enjoyable for me. But the cool thing that happened out of it was that on like Messenger, I had like 2,000 people just message me and go, wow, I fucking never ever heard anyone talk like that before, all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of where it happened. And that's like what we've been doing. So that was in like 2014, 15, something like that. And we started doing like speaking gigs and all that kind of shit. And then, in lockdown, I was doing a lot of like government stuff for a while, doing like drug policy things. And then, in lockdown, we just like couldn't really go anywhere, sitting around. And so we started the podcast, and it's been really cool. It's like, I was surprised early on, right? Like, so it's not massive like a Joe Rogan or anything like that.
No, but you've got a core audience, and
thousands of people listening every week. It kind of blows me away. I'm like, wow, so it's interesting. And we try and cover it all, like the spectrum. So people's personal stories, how they got recovery, of people listening for that reason. I guess professionals in the space to kind of talk about all the different stuff, some of the stuff we've been talking about tonight, and you know, like I want to do a bit more like family stuff, and I also want to do, that's the kind of vision in the next year, is some more like original media stuff, like maybe try and go find like some drug dealers or people still like actively involved doing, just to get the different perspectives, because I think it's interesting to people, you know?
Totally. I think do you find that the audience is predominantly people who have addiction, people that are recovering, or medical professionals, or a bit of everything?
It's a bit of everything, actually. Yeah. So it's hard to monitor, but we've got like a newsletter that we do now because, we wanted a place where we could just kind of like put out some of the more like longer form ideas that I'm talking about, you know, tonight. And it's easier to just explain it in one run without it sounding crazy. And we predominantly get a lot of health professionals signing up to that. But the majority of people that message us privately, people that have addictions or are using drugs that don't think they have a problem and just interested in drugs and stuff like that, you know. So I think it's
the whole
a bit
gamut
of
everybody.
Yeah.
And I guess it must be good when you get the positive stories of people like, I saw this podcast and now I'm on my own journey and blah blah blah.
Yeah, we've had heaps of people. It's been awesome. So there's a few people that come through. Like we've got a program that we run that's like a recovery program. So there's like a few people that contact us that have heard the podcast and come through there, and that's always cool. But then there's lots of people that have just like listened to the podcast that have like messaged us and said, you know, we've used this and that thing and it's helped us and whatever. So it's been cool. It's been really cool.
And like, there's a guy that I knew that you had on recently, Kane, and he has turned his addiction into a whole sort of a similar sort of thing where he's helping people. And I guess a lot of people do that. They figure out that they needed help and they sort of see a gap in the market where they're like, well, I can help people in this respect.
100%. Yeah. So, and that's essentially what happened to me as well. You know, I was telling you, I think before we started recording, like, after the sporting stuff, I was just one of those people that just had no idea what I wanted to do. And it was such a life-changing, profound experience that I had, because I'd seen other services before that and just didn't connect with it. But when I went through that service and met those people with the lived experience, I was like, fuck, that's awesome. Maybe I'll just go and study that. And it's kind of just naturally and organically unfolded from there, you know.
I think with the internet, some good stuff comes, some bad stuff comes. I think a lot of people now can see things glamorized with social media. But you can also see the other side of it where you can see people's downfall as well. So I guess you might get people now that are triggered by something that happens on social media. They're like, fuck, is this what I look like? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely like what you were talking about before. I think about that a lot. Like there is some concerning stuff about how it influences young people. Like a big one that we're seeing a lot is like, you know, all the stuff with like lean and all that. Like that's kind of big these days, and that's all from fucking rappers and shit like that, you know. Then there's like positive stuff like what we're doing, celebrities talking about whatever.
When you see someone like Steve-O getting clean, you're like, fuck, if he can do it, I think we all, that's cool. Anyone could.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like I still like, so Russell Brand was like I actually met that guy in person when he was like coming down a tour. He's like a really good dude. He comes to like recovery meetings and stuff like that. I don't agree with some of the things that he says now, but he's just fucking awesome. Like it's so cool to have them. Steve-O, you know, like fucking loved all that stuff that guy would like put out, all the things that he talks about, all of that. Like it is really cool to see like the power of social media and how
but
it can
I guess
change.
like I don't know if you've seen Shooter Williams in the last few days on TikTok and stuff, but he's like he's looked like he's hit rock bottom again, I guess, and that stuff has a people can look at that and be like, fuck man, like this, I don't want to end up like that. So I feel like in a roundabout way it can have a positive effect.
100%. I agree. Again, I'm just a big believer is that you just fucking be honest with people and just let people talk and just let people explain their genuine perspectives and experiences, even if it's kind of a bit like, whoa. But it will help. Like you never know who's going to connect with it for whatever reason, you know. When
you've got people come and you speak to them, I guess you sort of have to look into their home life and their family life as well, because there might be generational cycles that you need to break and that sort of thing.
Most definitely, all the time. Even like, so on like a personal recovery level, like I'm really into like identity, unconscious, like negative belief systems, all that stuff, and everybody has them, right? You don't have to have like a super like fucked up experience, but everybody has them, and that's the stuff that is kind of impacting the way that people are like thinking about themselves and the rest of the world, which then impacts, you know, the actions that they take, the decisions that they make, which then leads to whatever's happening in their life, you know. So 100% you help someone get off it, then you start going into all that stuff, like what's the family dynamics, what's the story that you've told yourself about yourself as a result of those, consciously or unconsciously, how's it playing out in your behavior, what do we need to change? And when you change those practical things, that's when things, you know, sort of change in people's life.
It's interesting. Like I often think of this when you think about helping people. You can't help someone who won't help themselves, which I think is definitely true to an extent. But they need to be willing to make those changes for any of the shit that you're going to do to work.
True, correct. And so, yeah, like I agree. You can't help somebody until they want to help themselves.
You can sort of guide them in the right direction.
But you can guide them in the right direction. You can influence them. You can put them in front of information and education that could, you know, set the light bulb off in their mind that, you know, and I've seen that time and time again with people. And it's amazing to see. I did used to see that a lot. That's one of the very powerful things in like 12-step meetings, you know. Like I distinctly remember this one guy, I won't like blow his cover, but he was pretty fucking rough and ready. He was just out of the nick, life of crime, stuff like that. And there was just a guy talking, and he was like a dude that had been clean for like 20 years. And this guy had no interest in getting sober. I think he was there just for like jail or whatever. And the guy just said something that like clicked with him, and he was just like inspired. He fucking put his hand up. He said, "Oh, I'll have a talk." Came up, spoke. Everybody got around him. He lives a completely different life to this day.
That was just that light bulb moment.
That's right. So it's just, yeah, you never know like what things are going to happen, and it's so important to not give up on people and try.
And I guess from a individual's perspective, they don't want to give up on themselves, because you might try to get clean, or you might try to kick an addiction. It may not work the first few times, but eventually it might. That's
right. Well, again, going back to some of the stuff we were talking about before, like, sounds strange again, but you know, if people come to me and they're using, let's just say they're using ice every day, 3 points a day, right? We'll go, yeah, we want to work on stopping that. But if you like bring that down to like 1 a day, that's a win, right? And then next week, let's go for, and there's this fallacy that people think like, which is kind of true, that if you have 1, you're just going to do it anyway. But if you're feeling like progress and momentum and you're on the right path, 100%, like, and if you go, 3 months and you fucking pick up again or something, like, don't go, "Oh, I'm a fucking addict."
Don't beat yourself up about it. Yeah,
whatever, who cares? Like, you did it once. Like, that's amazing. In this whole 3 months, you're doing it every day, you did it once. Let's look at where you made some of the mistakes and like keep moving forward. That kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that sort of thought process would definitely help a lot of people make the initial steps, because they may not be, they know that they've hit a point that they're not really happy with, but they're not ready to go totally cold turkey, because that's just too daunting for them.
That's right. And you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, and it's honestly profound, like the mental and emotional shifts that you have when you start to go on the process. And I actually think engaging someone and convincing him just to start going through a process is the biggest thing that you can do, because once you get him in the process, you have a very good chance that there's going to be something that fucking bings off and they go, "This is awesome. I do want to live my life like that." You know what I mean? So it's just important to get people started and going on something, and it would be such a shame to exclude someone because they're not at a certain threshold at that point in time, you know?
Yeah. Like when we were saying before with the celebrities, and you see some celebrities that obviously they're not obviously, but pretty much I believe the drug of choice for those sort of people is coke, which is pretty normalized and pretty accepted in Australia.
right, yeah.
And when you see, like, there was a jockey the other day and she got done doing some lines, and there's influencers and all that stuff. And then a lot of people are like, well, everyone's doing it. Do you find that that's a negative way of thinking? Like, when they say everyone's doing it, a lot of people are.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's ruined their lives.
Yeah.
But is that normalizing it to a point?
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know. It's like, so I would probably say, I know it's news because it's someone that is of interest to the public, but that example, I think it's fucked that they show the videos and stuff like that. You know, like, so there could be a number of things going on. She could have like, you know, challenging stuff going on in her life. She might not. Like, there could be a whole bunch of things going on, but I just think, like, it's really fucking irresponsible for, like, the media to put that stuff up.
But the media doesn't have any scruples with anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's,
That's
you're
right.
not. You're not.
But I guess, and the reaction that people have and kind of saying that it's so wrong is what encourages the media to keep doing it. And I think I do know what you're saying, and I kind of agree on some point. Like, we shouldn't just, like, normalize and go fucking whatever, but we also just shouldn't, like, keep feeding that, like, sort of outrage around it. Yeah.
I think that what happens a lot with that sort of stuff in the mainstream media, the people that don't understand drugs in general,
Yeah.
like, say my nan, she's got no idea.
Yeah.
She'd think that that's the same as heroin and ice and whatever, because these guys had a couple of lines when they were having a few drinks. Because some people just think, well, that's all drugs.
Yeah.
So I think it helps because at least that way now people can sort of have the conversation. They do that, and maybe it doesn't affect them. That doesn't ruin their whole lives.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just lump all that drug shit in together.
Do you think that we should, like, legalize drugs in society?
Decriminalization's definitely one thing.
Yeah.
Legalization is another thing. Again, I think that would potentially just be the government trying to get their slice of the pie, because then they can look at how much tax they take off booze. Like, I know a lot of people in the hospitality industry, and that increase goes up every 6 months.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's just the government being greedy.
Yeah.
And taking from an industry, you know, that gets into the lockdowns, which I won't touch on. But I feel like if the government did legalize things, they'd just want to take their slice.
Yeah. So is that the reason why you would think that we shouldn't legalize?
Well, I don't know, man. It puts it into people always want to do something that's illegal.
Right.
I think that's sort of human nature.
Yeah.
So if you legalize one thing, is it going to push it in another way? Like, I guess you could do case studies on what's gone on in the US where they've legalized weed. Has that changed drug culture?
Yeah.
From what I'm seeing on social media, it looks like they're still pretty fucked over there.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, they'll just figure out another way to get hot fentanyl and all that sort of stuff.
But so like, it's interesting. I always like asking people because, again, it's been a journey for me. I think we most definitely should, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that it has to look like alcohol. Like, you can go down to the IGA and get a fucking bag of smack or something. No. But I think, I definitely think that we should. Like, I think it would eliminate organized crime and a big chunk of their sort of business in a heartbeat, right? And also, I think, people might be using drugs, but again, like, to me, that's almost like not the most important thing, because heaps of people are using alcohol and fucking other people up as well, you know. But it will stop, like, all the people going to prison and all the other shit that happens.
And that cyclical thing, when they go to prison, they come out, they get back on it, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The organised crime thing is an interesting one, because I think that they might... Look, those sort of groups are going to find a way to make money, and they might go into different other avenues to try and recoup this money. So I don't know whether that's necessarily going to fix a lot.
I don't know if it'll fix it, but it'll surely, like, in organised crime, I would say, without knowing much, but I would say that drugs would have to be pretty much the biggest revenue source for all of organised crime. on a number of different levels. And if you like just took that out, the demand for manufacturing and the production of it, and took that all legally, that's gone.
So how do you see this process working? So you go, can somebody say, they go to their doctor and they say, you know what, it's my birthday, wouldn't mind trying Coke, ice, some party drug, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then the doctor writes them a prescription. Like, how does this actual process work in your decriminalized?
It's a good question. Like, I think there is a lot of nuances, and it would be about assessing it off like a harm basis, and which then does bring alcohol into an interesting fucking conversation as well. Because if you think about not only like to kind of society, which you could argue is largely because of the prevalence of it, but also actually what it does to you like health-wise compared to other substances, it is like worse than a lot of other ones, right? But yeah, you would have to kind of look at all those different factors and sort of put those more harmful ones, on maybe like a prescription basis. But then, like things like probably weed and then some sort of like stimulants, creating some kind of a market for people. And what they've seen in Portugal, right? So where they did do some of this stuff is that they saw an uptick in drug use, but they saw but the reason why they did it was because they had a HIV/AIDS crisis, right? They saw a downtick in all of that. They've seen a massive decrease in all the other like stuff that happens in society in terms of violence and all these kind of things. And that's really kind of, I suppose, what we want. And this is where it gets into the interesting conversation about moralizing the use of like substances, right? And having a problem with substances is different to having them available and allowing people to use them. Then obviously we should have services and stuff set up to help people if they do encounter a problem.
There's always, and I love your utopia kind of view that it'll all work amazingly, but I think that
no, I don't think it would all work amazingly.
But I love your optimistic outlook with it, but I think what would tend to happen a lot, and we see it already with prescription drugs, is people would get this stuff and then they would sell it. You know what I mean? Like people do with Xannies or fucking whatever it is. So I think that would happen a lot as well.
But if there was the ability, like I'm fucking no good with like chemical compounds, but like say if we could get stuff out there on the market that that allowed people to use opiates, say, and they could get a prescription, for instance, but they could only get it like once every fucking 4 weeks or something like that, or whatever, right? We would still have overdose deaths, but I think it would eventually, not straight away, it would probably increase to start with, but eventually it would take away the demand, because there wouldn't be, as you said, that sort of illusion of like, oh, what is that? Can I use that kind of thing?
But it does open up a real Pandora's box, because if you're a GP and this person is addicted to whatever, it's an opiate, then you can prescribe them something. But if it's some kid that comes in and goes, I just want to have a crack at this, do they then say, well, no, you don't?
Well,
what are you doing?
That's right. So that, like, again, I think we would be able to take the lessons from alcohol, so the age that you're allowed to like use those substances goes up, probably way past 18. That there might be like a bunch of different like thresholds that you have to meet, but I just think there would still definitely be drawbacks to it. I agree, but I think on the level of like all the harm that is created in society as a result of everything that kind of comes along with drugs, the crime, the institutionalization of people, the stigma, all of that, that's worth kind of changing, which will breed and adapt healthier and create a healthier environment for other people moving forward in the future.
Yeah, look, it's definitely an interesting one, and we're probably taking a step in the right direction with the cannabis thing, and other countries are doing it. We have the beauty of hindsight where we can sit back and watch other countries that have done it and use that as a case study and be like, well, this worked and this didn't work. But I think we're probably a long way away from legalizing anything personally.
Oh, I think so too. I think it'll be fucking ages, right? Because we're so run by just like archaic sort of ways of thinking about things. But yeah, it is super frustrating that we won't just start with like a few things. And on that point, that's the other thing that angers me is like in our space. So the TGA came and, released the regulations for therapeutic use of psychedelics and stuff like that. And now what's happened is that like all the people that had been, not all the people, but a lot of people that have been advocating for that to happen have kind of like started complaining about it now and said, oh no, they've done it too quickly. They haven't taken like some precautions, stuff like that. It's going to affect this. It's only going to be accessible to like people that have money. And some of those arguments are true and valid, but it's like, come on, man. Like that's huge progress. Shut the fuck up. I know that there's like problems. Stop like being negative. We've had like progress. Work with, the system and the people to get it more favorable as we go. But, like we've also got to stop shooting stuff down when there is like progress. What's that saying? Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good type attitude,
So even though we haven't legalized anything, you've got the safe injecting room.
Yeah.
Now, what's your stance on that?
Yeah. So look, admittably, they're fucking stupid that they put it next to the primary school. Like, come on.
That's agreed. But there's never going to be a good spot for it. No one's ever going to be like, yep, put it next to us.
Yeah, correct, true. But yeah, I think they should. I definitely think they should have it. I probably wouldn't say that they need to like have like lots of them, like the new proposed one, or I can't even remember now if it's going ahead, but the other one that's going to be in the Vic market. I'm not sure about like the heroin, because mainly that's what it's for, or the drug problem around there. But definitely North Richmond. Like I used to go back down there and score back in the day. It was fucking hectic. Like, and anybody that says to me that it's attracting drug users is fucking lying, because they're all there anyway.
They were there. I was there waiting to go into a meeting. I'd work with some venues there, and I just saw this whole bunch of people there just waiting. One dude came, they all followed him. He's obviously doing the deal.
Yeah.
And that was going on before the injecting room was there.
100%. So, and this is what annoys me, even like that school thing. So they shouldn't have put it next to that, but people always bring that up, right? And I hate the hysteria around it. It really annoys me because people aren't telling the truth. They're selectively picking facts. But at that school, before the injecting room was there,
people would find syringes fucking everywhere.
They used to teach the kids to walk to school looking at the ground and how to walk in zigzags to not get poked by like sharps and stuff, right? So, don't fucking stand on the TV screaming like, you're putting it next to the kids, when it was already happening there. And it was raucous down there in North Richmond.
Yeah.
Like, it's gotten a lot better. It still goes on, obviously, but it was hectic when I used to go down there to school.
And look, I spent a lot of my life in St Kilda, and they had the needle exchange there, and it wasn't legal, but it almost was, where they would, and that has been happening since the 80s. You know what I mean? Like, so this isn't a new idea. It's a new way that the government have actually done it, but it's been happening for at like a few of those places down there. I think Sacred Heart and another one for years. So it's not a new idea.
Yeah, that's right. Like, so yeah, it is a tricky one, and I would probably be unpopular in some of my professional circles, maybe doubting the one in South Melbourne. But if I'm being honest, I haven't been down to like the Queen Vic market recently, so I don't know if it is like fucking hectic down there and it's all happening. But before that, before I was born, I guess, like it used to be Russell Street, I think. Like, where
Russell Street was definitely,
But then they just moved everyone on and it ended up in Victoria Street, you know what I mean? So it's just, you can't just move the problem along. You got to actually do something to address it.
Yeah, and I don't think that by doing this, it's going to necessarily fix a problem, but it will make things safer for the drug-using individuals, but also for the public, because everything is being disposed of correctly.
Correct. So, and just to give everyone an idea as well, like it sticks in my mind because so I never ran a heroin habit. I used heroin a few times, but a lot of my mates were like heroin addicts. And so we used to be at Vic Street a lot. And I remember one day they used to do, I don't know what they call them, but they used to do these like police fucking sweeps in Vic Street. And I remember this one time we went down there, we got off the train. And in that day, the dealers used to line up right outside North Richmond Station when you'd walk off right on Vic Street. But we got off and there was literally like 100 to maybe like 150 cops all down Vic Street in groups of 5, just like walking down the street, just pulling up everybody that looked the slightest bit dodgy, checking people's arms, all this kind of stuff. All the dealers had like retreated back into the flats and their houses and whatever. That did not stop us scoring drugs, right? And it was fucking hard to like score the drugs, but my mate got on and whatever, right? So like if you have that problem going on and that situation happening, no matter what people might have you believe, even doing intense things like police sweeps like that, people will still go there and try and score drugs. And if they do it continuously, the problem will just move somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know.
It is definitely a thing. That similar sort of thing happened in St Kilda where they had the prostitution sort of thing, and they would come and that it would just push where the girls were working further out. It's just
So that's a good example of like that legalisation thing, right? So like, you know, it's sex work is legal here in Victoria. I don't know.
Two next. The next
I saw that.
Buildings.
I nearly went into that.
This is
one,
the
right?
brothel district of Melbourne.
That's right. So prostitution still exists in Victoria, but I would argue that it's fucking a lot better, just in terms of if you think about like the adverse consequences and stuff like that can happen.
There isn't, and I agree with you, but I think some of the people, and it's mostly the drug addicted working people, they wouldn't get a gig in one of those proper brothels because of their situation.
Correct.
So they still are working on the street.
Yeah. But if you just flip it, and if you just take a moment to say, no, sex work is illegal in Victoria, imagine all the stuff that we have around going away, and then all the people that are driving down fucking Grey Street, you know, to get a head job. Like, that would be intense.
It would. Totally. But I think Melbourne or Victoria has had brothels ever since I can remember. And I think that we've probably figured out a good way to do it, which other countries around the world or states even, like I think it was still illegal. It's still illegal in some other states.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but like I think what you've said, we've figured out a way to make it work with a lot of legislation and everything like that. But it probably wasn't an easy thing to fix. It's taken tens of years, you know, decades and decades and decades to get it to a workable model.
Correct. And then, so in saying that, like, from my perspective, that's why I reckon we need to kind of start.
You got to start with
the legalization stuff, and that's the thing that always sticks out to me. Like just how much of there'll still be some issues around, but just how much of a positive impact it can have. And as you said, you know, we're probably stereotyping a bit, but it's probably true that the people that are doing sex work on the street, probably it is because of their situation and their drug use. I
think a lot of the brothels and the standards that they would they would have to make sure that they don't look a certain way, having, you know, track marks or whatever. They would also have to do. They have to do tests to make sure that they don't have any diseases or whatever. So if you have an STD, well then you can't work there. So it still is it's not an exact science.
100%. Yeah, so it's interesting. But I think overall that's what I'm excited about with like the internet, this kind of stuff. You can have a bit more of a long form conversation and even in this setting, like I still find it hard to like sort of explain it and put it in a way where I'm like, that sounds like reasonable and rational, you know, but we're just getting to a place where we can at least like have a conversation and there's like a few good ideas that come out of it rather than trying to do drug policy in 2 minutes on the fucking project or something. You know?
Yeah, I can't stand those sort of shows that they just try and cram something in and then try and throw a gag in. Like, it's just not cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I know that you've got a
sorry, mate. I got one last client tonight.
That's okay. So yeah, look, man, it'd be great to have another chat where we could talk more and speak again and talk about, you know, some more of these ideas that what you would like to do and how you could see positive change coming. But before we wrap it up, do you want what's a little piece of advice you would give to someone who feels like they do have an addiction issue and the first steps that they could take on their own? They might have seen this and thought, fuck it, man, I'm going to make some steps. What can they do?
So just reach out. Like, so just reach out and talk to someone. I always give the advice to people, if you have someone in your life that you feel comfortable talking to, like a friend or a family member or something, that's usually kind of better. Like, I call it the hairdresser effect, you know. You'll probably actually get further with that. But if you don't, call a professional. You don't have to fucking tell your whole story or whatever. You just have to ask a few questions and engage and whatever. But the thing that I would say is, don't let that be the only time that you do it. Again, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to change tomorrow or anything like that, but just start an ongoing, not just one conversation, an ongoing conversation about where you're at, just so that you can get the ball rolling. Super cliche, I know, but that really is the most important thing. And if you want to take it further from there, you will naturally get the confidence and find the pathways to do that. You know, I'll give the national AOD hotline, right? Because that's always a good
shout out your podcast and where people could find you if they wanted to engage your services also.
For sure. So where Real Drug Talk's the best place on any like social media, and then you can follow the links to talk to us through there.
But you're not just specifically drugs, you do alcohol and other sort of addictions.
We do, yeah, we do alcohol and other addictions as well. Yeah. So and then there's something for everyone. So we've tried to kind of create something where, you know, there's educational stuff like books, podcasts, stuff like that you can buy for $5, listen to for free, whatever, right up to counseling sessions for a couple of $100, right up to like rehab, you know, and where you're doing something really intense. So it doesn't really matter where you're at. You can kind of reach out and find us. But if you just punch in Real Drug Talk, that's the easiest way to find it. But it's important, like the whole, you know, national AOD drug hotline, where you can call and be triaged or put through to wherever you are, and they'll tell you all the different services and stuff that are available. It's 1-800-250-015. I'm laughing because there's somebody that I work with. She's an ex-politician. She's crazy. She just yells at everyone, you got to put the national hotline on there, because we don't say it, right?
You don't say it. Well, we might even go one step further, and I'll get Adam, who's our awesome editor, to put that number at the end on the screen and maybe even at the start as well.
Awesome. Cool.
All right. Well, thanks, Jack, for coming, man. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to having you back some stage where we could talk more about this sort of stuff.
Done. No worries, mate. It'll be my pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Cheers.
3,000.